Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are diving into psychedelic psychotherapy.
Yeah, and this is honestly one of the most fascinating topics we've ever covered.
It really is. And I want you to just, imagine something for a second.
I'm with you.
Imagine a medical company develops a brand new medicine for extreme trauma, like debilitating trauma.
Right, something that normal treatments just barely touch.
Exactly. So they run the trials, right? And the data comes back showing that it completely cures 67% of the patients.
Which is, that's almost unbelievable.
It's wild. It doesn't just help them manage it, it actually removes their diagnosis entirely. You
Yeah.
probably think that this is the greatest medical breakthrough of our generation.
Oh, absolutely. Most people would. In the medical community, seeing numbers like that for a severe stress condition is almost unheard of. It basically looks like a miracle on paper.
Right. So you take that miracle data to the government health regulators,
Mm.
expecting them to fast track it, hand them the gold medal.
Yeah, you'd expect a parade.
But instead, they convene a panel, they look at your data, and they vote 10 to 1 to reject the drug entirely. Just a flat-out no. They tell you to go back to the drawing board.
Which is exactly what just happened recently. And that monumental rejection is really the crux of our journey today.
Yeah, it's just mind-blowing to me.
It is. But for you, the listener, understanding why that happened is the key to understanding the entire future of mental health.
Because it's not just about one drug, right?
Exactly. Today, we're looking at how mind-altering drugs, these highly publicized, controversial compounds, are actually being tested to heal the brain. We need to explore the surprising biology of why they work so rapidly.
And then we have to unpack the massive, almost unbelievable roadblocks preventing them from ever reaching the public.
Because the stakes here are just astronomical.
They really are. We are talking about millions of people suffering from profound, stubborn sadness and severe trauma conditions.
People for whom normal daily pills just do not work at all.
Right. They've tried everything, and they are completely out of options.
And that is exactly why this topic matters so much. We have a massive portion of the population that is completely underserved by the standard medical toolkit.
Yeah, it's basically a crisis.
It is a crisis. And this new frontier of mind-altering medicine has the potential to change everything for them. But that potential is entirely dependent on whether we can figure out how to safely test these compounds.
Right, and how to deliver them without breaking the entire healthcare system in the process.
Exactly.
I was reading through the stack of research notes you brought in for this deep dive, and the best way I can conceptualize where we are right now with this mind-altering medicine is to compare it to the very early days of human flight.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Think about those early aviation pioneers.
Mm.
What they were building in their barns was totally awe-inspiring. People were looking up at these flying machines with pure wonder, realizing the world was about to change.
It was a total paradigm shift. Suddenly, gravity wasn't the absolute limit it used to be.
But at the same time, it was incredibly terrifying and dangerous.
Oh, for sure.
They had these amazing machines, but they were completely lacking the air traffic control rules needed to keep everyone safe. There were no safety checks, no radar, no established flight paths.
Just people strapping engines to canvas and, hoping for the best.
Yeah, exactly. And that captures the current tension perfectly, right?
It really does.
Yeah.
We have this breathtaking new technology in the form of powerful mind-altering compounds. But our regulatory systems, our medical rule books, and our clinical testing methods, they were all built for the horse and buggy era of normal daily pills.
They just were never designed to handle a rocket ship.
Exactly. The friction you're seeing between a revolutionary, boundary-pushing treatment and a rigid, century-old regulatory system is causing massive turbulence.
Well, before we can even begin to look at that government drama and the turbulence in the system, we have to understand the rocket ship itself.
Well, you need to look at the biology.
Right, how these drugs actually change the brain.
Yeah.
Going into this, I totally assumed the healing was all about the psychological experience.
That's what most people think, honestly.
Yeah, I thought a patient takes the drug, has a profound hallucination, sees their childhood dog, has a good cry, and feels better. I really thought the hallucination was the medicine.
And that is a very, very common misconception. The hallucination is really just a side effect of the actual biological construction work happening behind the scenes.
Wait, really? A side effect?
Yeah. To understand the real healing, we have to look at the physical architecture of the brain, specifically how brain connections function and adapt to stress.
Okay, let me try to visualize this. Let's picture a healthy, thriving human brain as a lush, magnificent tree in the middle of summer.
Okay, a summer tree. I can picture that.
You have a thick trunk, strong branches, and branching off from those are thousands of tiny twigs holding millions of green leaves.
Right.
In the brain, those branches and leaves represent the connections between your brain cells. That lush canopy is how your brain communicates, how it feels joy, how it processes complex memories, and regulates your mood.
I really like that visualization. When someone is healthy, that canopy is dense and constantly communicating.
But when someone experiences severe, hard-to-treat sadness or an extreme trauma condition, it's not just a passing psychological mood shift, is it?
No, not at all. We can actually see a physical, structural degradation in the brain.
So using the tree idea, extreme trauma is like a harsh, freezing winter suddenly hitting that lush forest.
It acts very much like a severe frost, yeah. The severe stress condition literally causes the brain to lose its connections.
Yeah.
The physical architecture degrades.
The smaller twigs snap off, the leaves wither and drop.
Exactly. The brain becomes physically less connected. Now, when a doctor prescribes a normal daily mood pill, the goal of that pill is to try and reverse this winter.
But from what I understand, those daily pills work incredibly slowly. It basically feels like you're waiting for a glacier to melt.
It's a very slow process.
It can take months of taking a pill every single day just to slowly coax that winter tree into growing back a single leaf or a tiny twig.
Mm.
And for a lot of people, the winter is so harsh that the daily pills just can't keep up with the damage.
Right. The standard medications operate on a very delayed timeline, but this is where the biology of mind-altering drugs becomes so fascinating. They do not act like those daily pills.
What do they do differently?
Well, when introduced to a degraded brain, they act as a biological catalyst. They trigger an explosion of rapid, complex new growth.
Like how rapid are we talking?
Within hours, they cause that withered winter tree to sprout complex new branches and regenerate a massive canopy of leaves.
It's like pouring a magic super fertilizer on the roots. Almost overnight, the tree is lush and green again.
We call it rapid structural neural plasticity, but honestly, the concept of a super fertilizer captures the speed and scale of the change perfectly.
That is just wild to think about.
It is. These compounds force the brain cells to rapidly build new connections, completely bypassing the slow crawl of normal daily pills.
But for a very long time, there was a massive biological mystery surrounding this process, right? Something scientists just couldn't solve.
Yes, a massive puzzle in neurobiology.
I read about this mystery in the sources, and it basically felt like a locked room detective novel.
It really was.
It all centers around our brain's natural mood chemical, serotonin. We all know serotonin. It's the chemical our body naturally produces to boost our mood.
Right, the classic mood chemical.
And it turns out our natural serotonin fits into the exact same chemical switches in the brain as these mind-altering drugs.
Exactly. They both target the same specific receptors, which we can think of as the serotonin locks.
Okay, so here is the puzzle that was driving scientists completely crazy.
Hmm.
If both our natural mood chemical and these mind-altering drugs bind to the exact same locks in the brain, why doesn't our natural chemical act like the magic super fertilizer?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Why doesn't a burst of natural serotonin grow those branches instantly? Why does one chemical just give you a mild mood bump after a good workout, while the other chemical triggers an overnight explosion of brain growth?
And that question highlighted a huge gap in our understanding. Because structurally, they are interacting with the exact same target. So the differing outcome didn't make any sense at all.
So how did they figure it out?
Well, the breakthrough came when researchers stopped looking at what the switch was and started looking at where the switch was located.
Wait, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. Let's picture a single brain cell as a house. A locked house with a front door.
Okay, a locked house.
For years, scientists assumed the switch to turn on the super fertilizer, that serotonin lock, was located right on the front porch of the house, like out in the open.
Because that is the standard model of cellular communication. A chemical messenger floats up to the outside of the cell, rings the doorbell on the front porch, and a signal is transmitted inside to tell the cell what to do.
But you're saying the scientists were looking in the completely wrong place.
Completely wrong.
The breakthrough was realizing that the most important switch, the one that actually triggers the massive branch growth, isn't on the front porch at all. The switch is located inside the house.
Yes. It is sitting on a coffee table right in the middle of the locked living room.
And that geographical detail is the entire key to solving the mystery.
It's the whole key. It all comes down to basic cellular chemistry. We have to remember that human cells, including brain cells, are surrounded by a thick protective wall made entirely of fat.
Okay, and if we think about basic kitchen science, we know that fat and water do not mix. If you pour olive oil and water into a glass, they completely separate.
Right, the water can't penetrate the oil.
That chemical barrier is crucial. Our natural mood chemical, serotonin, is what we call a water-loving molecule. It dissolves very easily in water.
Which means when it floats up to the brain cell, it hits that fatty outer wall of the house, and it just bounces right off. It physically cannot pass through the fat barrier.
Oh, I see. So the natural chemical can only ever ring the doorbell on the outside porch.
Exactly.
It can never get inside the living room to flip the super fertilizer switch on the coffee table. It just bounces off the walls, giving us a mild mood boost, but never triggering the massive structural growth.
That is the hard limitation of our natural chemistry. But these mind-altering drugs, the psychedelic compounds, they are built fundamentally differently at a molecular level.
How so?
They do not dissolve in water, they dissolve in fat.
So they are essentially holding a VIP pass.
Molecular VIP pass, yeah.
Because they dissolve in fat, when they approach that fatty wall of the brain cell house, they don't bounce off like the natural chemicals do. They effortlessly melt right into the wall.
They do. They literally ghost right through the locked front door, walk casually into the living room, and flip that inner switch on the coffee table.
And boom, the super fertilizer is activated, and the tree starts rapidly growing new branches.
It is a brilliant mechanism. The fat solubility is the absolute key to unlocking the inner receptor. And the researchers didn't just hypothesize this. They proved it through some incredibly elegant experiments.
Oh, really? How do you even prove something like that?
They conducted structure-activity relationship studies, which basically means they took these mind-altering drugs and started tweaking their chemical structure in the lab.
Tweaking them how? Like changing their shape?
They engineered altered versions of these drugs that were chemically modified to be water-loving, just like our natural mood chemicals. They changed their polarity.
So they essentially revoked their VIP pass.
Exactly.
They made it so the drug could no longer dissolve in fat. They turned it into water.
Yes. And when they applied these altered water-like versions to the brain cells in the lab, the results were definitive.
Let me guess. They bounced off the house.
They bounced right off.
No way.
The altered drugs could still bind to the lock on the outside porch. They could still ring the doorbell. But because they couldn't penetrate the fatty wall to get inside the cell, they completely lost their ability to grow new brain branches.
Wow. The super fertilizer effect just dropped to zero.
Dropped to absolute zero. It proved that getting inside the cell is the absolute, non-negotiable requirement for healing the brain's connections.
That is just mind-blowing. The entire difference between feeling a little bit better and completely rewiring a traumatized brain comes down to simply crossing the threshold of a microscopic door.
It's all about access.
So, if these fat-dissolving compounds are so incredibly good at getting inside the cell and growing new branches overnight in a petri dish, the next logical question is, are they actually helping real people out in the world?
And that question takes us from the laboratory discoveries directly into the clinical trials. And we really need to look at the human stakes here because they are staggering.
They really are.
The primary target for a lot of this research is the problem of hard-to-treat sadness. In the United States alone, the data shows there are over 4 million adults who suffer from a level of sadness and depression that simply does not respond to normal treatments.
4 million adults. That is a massive group of people who are essentially being told by the medical establishment, sorry, we have run out of tools for you. You're just going to have to live like this.
It's heartbreaking, and the burden on those individuals is immense. When you look at the longitudinal data, these patients miss significantly more time from work, which impacts their financial stability. They suffer through episodes of misery that last 3 times longer than standard depression. And, most tragically, they face a more than 50% increased risk to their own lives.
Wow.
They experience a disproportionately poor quality of life. This isn't just feeling a little down, this is a chronic, devastating, life-threatening condition.
Which is exactly why the results from a recent set of trials are making such huge waves in the medical community.
Yeah.
We're talking about a specific active chemical found in magic mushrooms.
Yes, a very specific compound.
A pharmaceutical company ran these massive late-stage trials,
Mm-hmm.
which, is the final hurdle of testing before you ask the government for approval on people suffering from this exact stubborn, hard-to-treat sadness.
And the scope of these trials was highly rigorous. The researchers took this active mushroom chemical and tested different doses to establish a clear cause and effect.
Okay, how do they break that down?
They gave one group of patients a high dose, 25 milligrams of the compound, And they gave another group a tiny, almost microscopic dose of just 1 milligram.
A 1 milligram dose is basically like a speck of dust. I assume that was meant to be the control group, like a way to give them something so they feel included, but not enough to actually melt through the brain cell walls.
Yeah, that is exactly the idea behind a low-dose control. So you have these patients with severe, unyielding sadness. They administer the 25 milligram high dose.
And what happened?
The outcomes were, quite frankly, redefining what many doctors thought was possible in psychiatry. The high dose worked with incredible speed.
How fast?
When they assessed the patients the very next day, day 2 of the trial, the individuals in the high-dose group demonstrated massive, clinically meaningful improvements in their sadness severity scores.
The very next day. I mean, think back to our winter tree. Normal daily pills take months to grow a single leaf. This fat-dissolving drug walked into the living room, flipped the switch, and grew an entire lush canopy overnight. The patients woke up the next morning and the heavy fog of sadness had lifted.
The rapidity of the onset is truly remarkable. But, as any psychiatrist will tell you, rapidity is only half the battle.
What do you mean?
Well, we have seen other fast-acting interventions that provide immediate relief, but the effect wears off after a few days or weeks. What made this mushroom chemical trial historic was the durability of the healing.
How long did it last?
For the patients who responded well, that profound relief was not a fleeting chemical high. The significant improvement in their mood lasted for up to 26 weeks.
26 weeks. That is a full 6 months of sustained structural relief after just 1 or 2 administrations of the chemical.
It is unprecedented.
Okay, I have another way to visualize this because that durability is an absolute game changer. Imagine your smartphone completely freezes up.
We've all been there.
Right. The screen is locked. You can't swipe open any apps. It is just totally stuck. Now, normal daily mood pills are like having a faulty, frayed charging cable.
Okay.
You have to plug the phone into the wall every single day, and maybe that frayed cable gives it just enough juice to limp along so you can make a single emergency phone call. But the phone is still essentially broken, sluggish, and miserable to use.
Exactly. The patient becomes dependent on a constant daily medical intervention just to maintain a baseline of minimal, often unsatisfactory function.
Right. But this mushroom chemical treatment, this isn't a frayed charging cable. This is like doing a hard reset on the frozen smartphone.
A hard reset?
Yeah, you hold down the buttons, the screen goes completely black, the system reboots, and when it turns back on, the operating system is completely refreshed. It runs perfectly smoothly, and you don't need to plug it in that faulty cable every single day. You do a hard reset once, and the phone works flawlessly for the next 6 months.
That is a great way to put it. It represents a total paradigm shift in psychiatric care. We are looking at moving from a chronic daily medication model to a single episodic intervention.
It's just incredible.
However, there is a very specific, highly strategic loophole that this company used to get these incredible results through the test phase without triggering a regulatory nightmare.
A loophole.
Yes, and it revolves entirely around the people who were in the room with the patient during the treatment.
Oh, I found this part of the research fascinating. Because obviously you don't just hand a severely depressed patient a 25 milligram dose of a powerful mushroom chemical, say, have a nice Tuesday, and send them home.
No, definitely not.
The patient is going to experience a very intense 6 to 8 hour hallucinogenic trip. The walls are going to breathe. They're going to confront deep emotions. So the company required trained professionals to be in the room with them for the entire day.
That's right.
But they were incredibly careful, almost paranoid, about what they called these professionals in the legal paperwork.
Yes, the terminology was entirely deliberate. The company explicitly did not call the interaction therapy.
What did they call it?
They labeled the human element of the trial as safety support.
Safety support.
Yes, and this is a crucial, critical distinction in the eyes of the law. The professional sitting in that room is instructed to just be there to keep the patient physically and emotionally safe.
So they aren't acting as a therapist.
Exactly. They are expressly directed not to interpret the patient's visions. They are not guiding the patient's mind through past traumas or offering psychological analysis. They are providing strictly non-directive support.
So it's essentially like having a lifeguard at a public pool.
That's a good comparison.
The lifeguard doesn't jump in the water to teach you how to swim.
Yeah.
They don't critique your backstroke or ask you how the water makes you feel. They just sit in the high chair, keep an eye on you, and make sure you don't drown while you swim around and figure things out on your own.
That is a very apt comparison. The company stated publicly that psychological support is an essential element to safeguard the patient during the vulnerable state, but it is not an independent psychotherapy.
Right, it's just monitoring.
They even instructed the professionals that if the patient became restless or started asking questions about their visions, the monitor should just gently encourage them to direct their attention back inward.
No prolonged discussion.
Exactly, no therapeutic interventions.
And as we move into the next part of this deep dive, we're going to see exactly why that strategic legal phrasing, calling it safety support instead of therapy, is so insanely important.
It is a whole ballgame.
Because while this mushroom chemical is speeding toward government approval using its safety loophole, another famous mind-altering drug took a completely different path and just hit a massive, spectacular brick wall.
And this brings us to the ecstasy-like drug, the empathy-boosting compound we mentioned at the start.
Right.
This compound was moving through the exact same regulatory testing pipeline aimed at treating extreme trauma. But its journey ended in a very public, very controversial rejection.
Let's look at the data for this trauma drug, because as we mentioned at the very beginning of the show, the raw numbers are just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
We have a company that tested this empathy-boosting compound on people with severe stress conditions.
These are veterans, assault survivors, people with deep, complex trauma.
Right.
They ran 2 major late-stage trials, and unlike the mushroom company, they fully embraced the psychological element. They combined the chemical drug with an actual active talking therapy protocol.
And what were the results?
The results they published showed that 67% of the people who received the real drug alongside the therapy improved so dramatically that they no longer even met the medical criteria for their extreme trauma diagnosis.
I really want that to sink in for a moment. 67% were essentially cured of a condition that is notoriously difficult to treat.
And we have to look at the control group for context. Compare that 67% to just 32% of people who got fake sugar pills and went through the exact same talking therapy.
It's more than double the effectiveness.
Furthermore, on the official numerical scale that doctors use to measure the severity of trauma, the patients on the real drug saw an average drop of 24 points.
24 points.
Yes. To put that in perspective, the government health agency had previously agreed that just a 10-point drop would be considered a clinically meaningful, life-changing improvement. The drug delivered a 24-point drop.
So on paper, this looks like an absolute slam dunk.
Okay.
You have a drug that is literally erasing extreme trauma in over 2/3 of the patients, doubling the effectiveness of therapy alone, and completely shattering the baseline for success.
It looks phenomenal.
So the company takes this mountain of incredible data, they bundle it all up, and they hand it to the government health advisory panel, expecting a parade and a gold medal. What actually happens?
The advisory panel convened to review the data, and it was a total disaster for the company.
A disaster.
The panel voted 10-1 against recommending the drug. They overwhelmingly concluded that the risks and the flaws in the data outweighed the benefits.
Wow.
And following that panel's recommendation, the central government health agency ultimately rejected the drug application entirely. They sent a formal rejection letter, legally halting the approval process.
Okay, I am playing the role of the confused public here, because how is that even logically possible? How do you have a medicine that cures 67% of people of extreme trauma, and a panel of expert scientists votes 10-1 to reject it?
Sounds contradictory, doesn't it?
It sounds completely crazy. What on earth did they see in the data that spooked them so badly?
Well, to understand the government's rejection, we have to explore a massive structural flaw in the research. It's a phenomenon that scientists call functional unblinding.
Functional unblinding.
Or, to make it easier to visualize, we can call it the blindfold problem. It is a fatal flaw in how we currently test any mind-altering medicine.
Okay, let's break down the blindfold problem.
Mm-hmm.
In the medical world, the absolute gold standard of testing a new drug is a double-blind trial.
Correct.
That means neither the patient taking the pill nor the doctor handing them the pill knows if the patient is getting the real experimental medicine or just a fake sugar pill.
Exactly. It keeps everything totally fair and unbiased.
It is exactly like a blind taste test between two identical-looking cups of clear liquid. One cup is regular tap water, and the other cup is regular tap water. You put a blindfold on the person, they take a sip from both cups, and they have absolutely no idea which is which.
The blindfold remains securely on, and because neither the doctor nor the patient knows who got what, their personal expectations and hopes cannot skew the reported results. It isolates the pure biological effect of the drug.
Right, but imagine trying to do a blind taste test between a cup of regular tap water and a cup of pure, heavily concentrated, spicy jalapeno juice.
That's a great visual.
You can put the blindfold on the person, you can spin them around, you can have the doctor swear on a stack of medical journals that they don't know which cup is which.
Right.
But the absolute millisecond that patient takes a sip of the jalapeno juice, their mouth is on fire. Their eyes are watering, they are sweating, they are coughing. They know immediately, with 100% certainty, what group they are in. The blindfold is completely, utterly useless.
And that is exactly what happens with mind-altering drugs in these clinical trials. These compounds do not just work quietly in the background.
Not at all.
They cause intense, profound, hours-long hallucinations, massive sensory alterations, and sweeping emotional shifts. Physically, they induce obvious signs like pupil dilation, heavy sweating, and muscle tightness. The physical and psychological effects are just impossible to ignore.
So in this trauma trial, the patients were given a pill and told, you might get the miracle drug or you might get a sugar pill. But as soon as the walls started melting and they felt this overwhelming rush of intense empathy and physical warmth, the jig was completely up.
It was completely up.
I saw the stat in the research. A massive 90% of the people in the trials correctly guessed whether they got the real drug or the fake pill. 90%.
Which introduces a massive confounding variable known as the expectation trap.
The expectation trap.
Yes. You have to consider the cultural context surrounding these trials. Psychedelics have been hyped in the media, in documentaries, and in books for years as these miraculous brain-resetting cures.
Right. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do.
Many of the participants, and indeed the therapists running the sessions, came into the trial with very strong pre-existing beliefs that this drug was going to be a life-saving intervention.
So if you're a patient desperate for relief from years of extreme trauma, and you take the pill, and suddenly you feel the jalapeno juice, you feel the intense physical rush of the drug kicking in, your brain immediately says, oh my gosh, I got the real thing. I got the miracle cure. I am finally going to be healed.
Exactly. The psychological priming is immense. And the human mind is incredibly powerful. Because both the patients and the doctors knew who got the real drug, their massive, overwhelming expectations likely artificially inflated the good results.
So the data might be completely skewed.
The government regulators looked at that 24-point drop in trauma severity and said, we have a serious problem here. We don't know how much of that healing is the actual chemical ghosting through the cell wall and fixing the brain, and how much of it is just the profound power of positive thinking and expectation.
It completely contaminates the data. If the patient strongly believes they are cured because they had a wild hallucination, they might self-report feeling much better on the surveys, even if the underlying biological architecture of their trauma hasn't changed as much as they think.
Exactly. And conversely, you have to think about the psychological impact on the poor people who received the fake pill.
Oh man, yeah.
They are sitting in a clinic room for 8 hours, staring at a wall, waiting for a miracle, and feeling absolutely nothing.
That would be crushing.
They quickly realize they are in the control group. They experience severe disappointment and a crushing loss of hope. That realization can actually make their stress symptoms worse, which artificially makes the real drug look even better by comparison. The baseline shifts.
So the blindfold problem was a huge, glaring red flag for the
A
government.
massive red flag.
But as I read further into the sources, the blindfold problem wasn't even the biggest reason the government said no. They could maybe work around the jalapeno juice issue if the data was otherwise clean. But the real nail in the coffin, the thing that caused the 10-to-1 rejection, was the human element, the therapy trap.
This brings us right back to the strategic difference between the two companies.
The loophole.
Right. The mushroom company used the safety support loophole to separate the drug from the human interaction. But the trauma drug company did the exact opposite. They tied their chemical pill inextricably to a specific active talking therapy program.
They bundled it.
Yes, they submitted the drug and the therapy to the government as one single combination package.
I want to use an analogy to explain why this completely broke the government regulators' brains.
Go for it.
Let's imagine a racing team enters the Daytona 500. They build an insanely fast car, they put a legendary driver behind the wheel, and they win the race. They completely shatter the track record.
But
The team goes to the racing judges to get their trophy. But the judges have a serious dilemma. They have to certify the win, but they have to ask, how much credit for this record-breaking time goes to the insanely powerful, super-fueled engine of the car, and how much credit goes to the expert human driver steering the wheel?
if you are a judge whose legal jurisdiction is only to evaluate engines, you have a massive problem on your hands.
Exactly. And that is the regulatory mismatch at the heart of this rejection. The government health agency, by federal law, is only authorized to evaluate and regulate the engine.
Their mandate is very clear.
Their legal mandate is to regulate the safety and efficacy of chemical pills. They do not and legally cannot regulate the practice of medicine or the conduct of human psychotherapy. They have no authority over the driver.
So when the drug makers bundled the chemical engine and the human therapist driver together as one inseparable package, the government literally did not know how to evaluate it.
They couldn't separate the data.
They couldn't mathematically isolate the independent pharmacological contribution of the chemical from the therapeutic stance and skill of the human therapist.
The regulators basically looked at the application and said, we can't approve a chemical if its success depends on a human therapist talking to you in a very specific way. We can test the chemical in a lab, but we can't guarantee that every single human therapist in the country is going to say the right things, have the right tone, or even be good at their job.
And their fears about the therapists were entirely justified.
Yeah, they were.
Because when the regulators started digging past the shiny 67% cure rate and looked at the raw conduct of the trials, the situation took a turn into some very dark, deeply concerning ethical clouds.
Yeah, this part of the deep dive gets really disturbing. The regulators found massive, glaring issues with how the human therapists were behaving during the sessions, and specifically how they were recording or hiding the side effects of the drug.
The first major issue the advisory panel highlighted was a systemic underreporting of adverse psychiatric events.
What does that mean in plain English?
Well, when you give someone a powerful mind-altering drug to treat extreme trauma, it is not always a pleasant experience. Sometimes they are going to have a very bad time. They might feel worse, they might become highly destabilized, or they might confront memories they aren't ready for.
But the therapists running these trials were incredibly biased toward wanting the drug to succeed, right?
Really biased. There was one participant who actually made a public comment to the government health agency, revealing some incredibly dangerous guidance she received during her session.
And what'd they tell her?
She said that when she took the drug, she started feeling much worse and was actually having a complete psychological breakdown during the trial. But her therapist told her that this wasn't a bad reaction to the drug. The therapist told her it was a sign of progress and a spiritual awakening.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
It is a profound scientific and ethical failure. Instead of properly recording her psychological breakdown as a negative side effect of the chemical, which is what a trial is strictly supposed to do, the therapist reframed the adverse event as a positive therapeutic breakthrough.
This completely skews the safety data. If therapists are hiding negative drug reactions behind spiritual buzzwords, the government has absolutely no idea how dangerous the drug actually is.
And it didn't just end when the drug wore off, it got much worse after the trials officially ended.
How so?
Because during the trial, these vulnerable patients are getting intense, round-the-clock support and attention from these highly enthusiastic therapists. It feels like a warm cocoon. But then the trial period ends, the data is collected, and that intense support just vanishes overnight.
And what happens to the patients?
Reports surfaced that multiple trial participants began feeling severely suicidal after the trials concluded. The sudden removal of that intense psychological support framework caused massive emotional rebounds and crashes.
That is terrifying.
And when regulators looked for the data on this, they found the company's long-term follow-up protocols to track these crashes were highly fragmented and fundamentally flawed. The long-term safety picture was basically a black hole.
But the absolute darkest moment of the review, the thing that I think really forced the government's hand to vote 10-1 against the drug, involved a hidden video camera.
Yes.
There was an incident in one of the trial sites in British Columbia that just horrified everyone who saw it.
It was a profound breach of medical conduct. The hidden video footage showed therapists acting highly inappropriately with a patient who was actively under the influence of the mind-altering drug.
I mean, I almost can't even believe it.
The therapists were seen getting into the bed, spooning the patient, and physically pinning the patient down during the session.
I mean, think about the vulnerability there. You have a patient with severe trauma whose mind has been completely opened up and stripped of its defenses by a powerful chemical. And the trusted medical professionals in the room are physically crossing boundaries in an incredibly inappropriate, invasive way.
It's awful.
When that video came to light, it sent absolute shockwaves through the medical community.
Because it proved the government's exact regulatory fear. If you approve a drug that requires a human therapist to guide a highly vulnerable patient through an altered state, you are opening the door to massive potential for abuse.
And the government health agency has no mechanism, no funding, and no legal authority to police the behavior of therapists in thousands of independent clinics across the country. They cannot regulate the driver.
Exactly.
Which brings us full circle back to the mushroom chemical company from part 2. When you see the trauma drug get spectacularly rejected because of biased therapists, spiritual buzzwords, and boundary violations, it suddenly makes total sense why the mushroom company is desperately trying to strip the word therapy out of all their legal paperwork.
They saw the writing on the wall.
They're basically running to the government regulator screaming, "Look at us, we just have a chemical pill. The human in the room is just a safety monitor reading a book in the corner. There is no therapy happening here. Please just approve our chemical engine."
It is a frantic, strategic pivot to separate the biology from the psychology in the eyes of the law. But even if they successfully solve the therapy trap by calling it safety support, they still have to solve the testing puzzle.
Right.
Because the government is still going to demand that they prove the chemical works without the expectation trap artificially inflating the results.
Right, the jalapeno juice problem. If we can't do a secret double-blind test because the physical side effects of the drug are so incredibly obvious, how do we ever prove to a room full of skeptical scientists that these drugs are actually causing the biological healing?
We have to find a way to build a better blindfold.
And this is where the research gets incredibly innovative. Scientists acknowledge the testing flaw, and they are proposing some truly fascinating, out-of-the-box solutions to fix the clinical trials of the future.
Let's talk about the first solution.
The Hollywood stunt double idea. I love this concept. Usually, the control group gets a totally fake sugar pill that does absolutely nothing. But researchers are suggesting we need to give the control group an active fake pill.
The precise scientific term is an active placebo.
Okay, so an active fake pill is a drug that causes noticeable physical side effects, but doesn't actually have the fat-dissolving VIP pass to heal the brain.
Right.
So instead of a sugar pill, maybe they give the control group a high dose of a specific vitamin that makes their skin flush bright red and feel hot. Or they give them a mild stimulant that makes their heart race, or something that gives them a tiny dizzy buzz.
The goal of the active placebo is to mimic the physical onset of the real mind-altering drug. So when the control group patient takes the pill, they don't just sit there feeling normal.
They feel something happening.
They feel their body physically reacting. They feel weird. Their heart rate changes. Their skin tingles. This sensory input convinces them that they might have actually received the real miracle drug.
It keeps their expectations high.
And it keeps the blindfold securely on.
It's brilliant. They think they got the jalapeno juice because their mouth is tingling, but it's really just a harmless peppermint oil. It mimics the physical feeling of the onset without ever getting inside the cell to flip the inner switch on the coffee table. It keeps the hope alive for the control group.
It does. But an active placebo has its limits. A flushed face or a racing heart might mimic the first 20 minutes of a trip, but it is not going to mimic a full 6-hour visual hallucination where the walls are melting.
That's true.
Which leads to another, much more technologically advanced idea proposed by scientists to fix the control group using digital headsets.
The virtual reality solution. When I read this in the notes, it sounded like pure science fiction, but strategically it makes total sense.
It is a very creative approach.
If the core problem is that the control group gets disappointed because they don't get to see the walls melting, let's just use technology to make the walls melt for them.
The concept is to put the control group patients into an immersive virtual reality environment that visually and auditorily simulates the experience of a hallucinogenic trip.
Like putting a headset on them for hours.
Yes, it surrounds them with shifting colors, moving landscapes, and distorted sounds, mimicking the perceptual distortions of the real drug.
I mean, I have to push back a little here because seeing a cool kaleidoscope screen in a VR headset is very different from feeling a profound spiritual connection to the universe.
Oh, without a doubt.
But I guess the point is to acclimate them to the absolute weirdness of the visual experience without actually giving them the fat-dissolving chemical.
That is the exact rationale. It is an attempt to separate the psychological awe of seeing crazy things from the biological healing of the superfertilizer.
Okay, I see.
If you give one group the real chemical and you give the other group a sugar pill but put them in a mind-bending VR simulation for 6 hours, you are leveling the playing field of expectations.
And if the VR group doesn't get better, but the chemical group does.
You have undeniable proof that the magic is in the intercellular chemistry, not just the visual light show.
It isolates the engine. But as cool as VR is, the most radical idea mentioned in the research, and the one that honestly seems the most scientifically pure, is the sleep through it approach.
It is certainly the most extreme proposal, but from a purely scientific standpoint, it eliminates the expectation trap entirely.
This one just blew my mind. Think about it. The expectation trap only works if the patient knows they are taking the drug, feels the trip happening, and consciously expects to get better, right?
The conscious mind is the problem.
So what if we just take the patient's conscious mind completely offline before we give them the drug?
The proposal is to utilize general anesthesia.
Wait, general anesthesia?
Yes. You take the patients suffering from extreme trauma, you bring them into a controlled operating room environment, you administer anesthesia to put them completely under, and while they are totally unconscious, you administer the mind-altering drug.
Now, wait a minute. I have to stop you there, because the logistics of this sound absolutely insane. You are suggesting we take millions of depressed people, bring them into hospitals, hire highly paid anesthesiologists, and put them into medically induced comas just to give them a mushroom chemical.
I hear you.
The cost and risk of that would be astronomical.
You are absolutely right about the logistics. As a widespread daily treatment model, it is highly impractical.
Okay, good.
But as a scientific experiment to prove to the government that the drug works, it is genius. It is not necessarily how you would deliver the drug to the masses. It is how you isolate the biological mechanism to pass the regulatory test.
Ah, I see. Because if they are asleep, they sleep through the entire 6-hour trip.
Yeah.
They have zero visions. They don't see the walls melt. They have zero emotional breakthroughs with a therapist. And most importantly, they have zero expectations because they don't even know when the drug is hitting their system.
The blindfold is perfect.
If they wake up from the anesthesia and a week later their severe, hard-to-treat sadness is completely gone, we have our final, undeniable proof.
It would be the ultimate demonstration of biological efficacy. It would prove to the regulators that 100% of the healing came from the chemical ghosting through the cell wall and flipping the inner switch.
And 0% came from the power of positive thinking or talking to a biased therapist.
Right. It completely removes the driver and tests only the engine.
It highlights the extreme, almost desperate lengths researchers are willing to go to validate these compounds. Because they know that if they can just figure out a way to navigate this regulatory testing maze, the potential to heal millions of people is waiting on the other side.
It is a massive prize. Okay, so let us engage in a thought experiment.
Let's do it.
Let's fast forward a few years into the future. Let's imagine one of these companies successfully navigates the maze. They run a flawless trial. Perhaps they use an active fake pill. They successfully strip out the psychotherapy and just use a safety monitor. The data comes back perfectly clean, and the government health agency finally bangs the gavel and says, approved.
The dream scenario.
The drug is legal for medical use. How do you, the listener, actually go about getting this treatment?
That is the final and perhaps most daunting real-world bottleneck. Because I think a lot of people assume that once a drug is approved, they're just going to take a prescription slip down to their local corner pharmacy window, pick up a little orange bottle of mushroom pills, drive home, and take them on their couch.
That is definitely the mental image most people have.
But that is not how this is going to work at all, is it?
Not even remotely. The regulatory approval will come with unprecedented restrictions on distribution and administration.
The analogy I came up with for this is that getting this treatment is going to be less like a quick trip to the pharmacy and more like navigating a bizarre cross between a luxury day spa and an intensive care unit.
That captures the required environment perfectly. The government is going to demand incredibly strict safety programs. Any approval of a mind-altering drug will almost certainly be contingent on tightly controlled safety protocols.
Like, how strict are we talking?
Well, we have seen a preview of this with a previously approved nasal spray for depression. The rules will be ironclad and highly restrictive.
Because you have to think about the reality of the drug. The intense hallucinogenic trip lasts for 6 to 8 hours. You can't just have people picking this up at a drive-thru and then wandering around the streets operating heavy machinery or driving cars while the walls are melting.
No, it's a massive safety hazard.
The clinics that are licensed to administer this drug will need dedicated, highly specialized physical spaces.
The infrastructure requirements will be immense. These clinics will need private, quiet rooms, they will need specialized comfortable beds or recliners, and most importantly, they will need trained medical personnel to monitor the patients continuously for an entire workday.
Let's walk through what a day at one of these clinics actually looks like. The patient arrives at 9 in the morning, they take the pill,
Right.
and they do not leave that facility until 5 in the evening after every single perceptual and dissociative effect has completely worn off and they are deemed medically stable.
Think about the logistical strain of that model. A doctor, a nurse, or a highly trained monitor has to sit in a room with one single patient for 8 straight hours.
It's crazy.
That takes an enormous amount of physical real estate and specialized human labor.
It's the exact opposite of how modern medicine usually works. Usually a doctor sees 4 patients an hour. You go to a vaccine clinic and they process 100 people an hour in a high school gym.
Right, the volume is usually the focus.
This is one room, one professional, one patient for an entire workday.
Standardizing this high-intensity monitoring model across the country represents a massive scalability bottleneck. It will severely limit the geographical availability of these clinics. Building these specialized centers requires immense upfront capital.
So if you don't live in a major city, you're out of luck.
Basically, if you do not live near a major affluent city with a certified center, physically accessing this treatment will be incredibly difficult.
And that logistical nightmare leads directly to the most painful societal consequence of this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
The wealth gap.
Yes, the financial barrier.
Because dedicating an entire physical room and a highly trained medical professional to one person for a whole day is going to be insanely expensive. The overhead costs alone are staggering. We are talking about thousands and thousands of dollars for a single session.
And this is where the complex web of federal and state legal status creates an almost insurmountable wall for the average citizen.
How does the law affect the cost?
Because while a specific state might legalize these treatments, or the government health agency might approve a specific chemical, many of these underlying compounds are still broadly classified federally as illegal substances.
And why does that federal classification matter if the health agency approves it?
Because of how health insurance works in this country, many major employer health insurance plans, which cover the vast majority of working Americans, operate under federal guidelines.
I see where this is going.
They are often legally exempt from or will actively refuse covering treatments that utilize federally prohibited substances regardless of narrow medical approvals.
So even if your specific state embraces it and a clinic opens down the street from your house, the federal law allows these big employers' self-insured plans to just fold their arms and say, nope, the core compound is federally illegal. We aren't paying a dime for this.
Which means the entire thousands of dollars cost falls directly on the patient as an out-of-pocket expense. This maintains a deep structural socioeconomic divide in who actually gets to experience this medical breakthrough.
It creates a frankly dystopian reality. We finally discover the magic super fertilizer that cures hard-to-treat sadness and extreme trauma. But only wealthy people, people who have the disposable income to drop $5,000 or $10,000 out of pocket, get to go to the clinic and enjoy the 8-hour guided brain reset.
While everyone else is left behind.
Meanwhile, everyone else, the working class, people who often suffer the most from chronic stress, is stuck taking the slow, daily pills that barely work. The miraculous medical cure just becomes another luxury item for the rich.
It presents a profound challenge for the future of our medical system. We have identified a biological mechanism that works wonders, but the delivery system is so inherently resource-intensive and legally complex that it threatens to widen the healthcare disparity rather than close it.
Which brings us to the ultimate provocative thought for you to mull over. It actually brings this entire deep dive full circle right back to the very beginning.
If we think back to the biological mystery we explored in Part 1.
The locked house, the coffee table, the VIP pass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We discovered that the true magic of these mind-altering drugs isn't necessarily the psychological hallucinogenic trip itself. The fundamental biological magic is simply their physical ability to dissolve in fat, ghost through the protective walls of the brain cell, and physically flip that inner switch in the living room to grow new branches.
Right. The entire breakthrough was just getting inside the cell. The trip is just the jalapeno juice. It's just a side effect of the chemical shape.
So this raises the most important question in modern pharmacology. If the structural brain healing is just a mechanical process of crossing a fatty barrier and flipping a chemical switch,
Yeah.
do we actually need the 8-hour hallucination?
Oh, well.
Do we need the melting walls, the intense emotional journey, the specialized day spa clinics, and the thousands of dollars in monitoring costs?
This is the billion-dollar question. Because if the trip is just an accidental side effect of the VIP pass, then the ultimate future of mental health might not be these expensive, restrictive 8-hour clinics at all. We might be looking at this entirely the wrong way.
The true future likely lies in advanced molecular engineering. Scientists are already racing in labs across the world to build a synthetic compound that retains the VIP pass, a molecule that can dissolve in fat and effortlessly walk through the cell wall to grow the branches, but is chemically tweaked to completely remove the hallucinogenic trip.
A completely non-hallucinogenic superfertilizer. It would be a true, absolute miracle pill.
It would change the world.
You could wake up on a Tuesday morning, swallow a pill before you drink your coffee, your brain branches would start rapidly growing like a lush summer tree, and you would just get in your car and drive to work.
Exactly.
You wouldn't feel a thing. No intense trip, no 8-hour clinic, no $10,000 bill, no wealthy elite exclusivity, just profound biological healing accessible to everyone.
It is the absolute holy grail of modern psychiatry. A treatment that harnesses and respects the complex biological architecture of the brain while completely bypassing the regulatory, ethical, and logistical nightmares of a psychedelic trip. The race to engineer and perfect that compound is happening right now, behind closed doors, in labs across the world.
And until they crack that molecular code, we are going to be stuck navigating this messy, awe-inspiring, frustrating era of early flight, trying desperately to build the airplane and write the safety rules while we are already miles in the air. Thanks for coming along on this deep dive with us. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast platform and see you on the next dive.